The concert hall erupted in chaos as Elena Harper collapsed onto the polished stage floor, her hands instinctively wrapping around her 7-month pregnant belly. Blood trickled from a gash above her eyebrow, where her head had struck the edge of a seat. The woman standing over her, Vivian Cross, one of the competition's most celebrated pianists, was screaming words that made the audience gasp in collective horror. Security guards rushed forward, but not before Vivian lunged again, her perfectly manicured fingers curled into claws. The crystal chandelier above cast dramatic shadows across the scene as camera flashes went off like lightning strikes. In the front row, a distinguished silver-haired man in a judge's panel seat stood abruptly, his face drained of color. Professor William Harper's composure, legendary in the classical music world, shattered completely as he recognized the woman bleeding on his stage. What happened next would expose a web of betrayal, reveal a secret that had been hidden for years, and deliver justice in the most unexpected way. The International Piano Excellence Competition was the kind of event that attracted the world's most gifted musicians. Held annually at the prestigious Steinberg Concert Hall, the competition offered a grand prize of $100,000 and guaranteed recording contracts with major classical labels. This year's event had drawn particular attention because of its principal sponsor, Blake Industries, a tech company owned by the young and wealthy Jordan Blake. The competition's final round had been nothing short of spectacular. 5 finalists had performed that evening, each delivering interpretations of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. The audience, composed of classical music aficionados, industry professionals, and wealthy patrons, had listened with rapt attention to every note. Among the attendees was Elena Harper, though few people knew her name. 7 months pregnant and wearing a simple navy dress, she sat in the middle section of the audience, her hands resting protectively on her rounded belly. Her presence at the competition was complicated. This hall held memories for her, memories of a time when she too had dreamed of standing on that stage. Her father, Professor William Harper, had taught her to play piano in this very building when she was a child. But that was before their relationship fractured, before she made choices he couldn't support. Now she sat alone, watching as her estranged husband, Jordan Blake, sat 17 rows ahead in the VIP section. He didn't know she was there. His attention was focused entirely on the stage where Vivian Cross had just finished performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with breathtaking technical precision. Vivian Cross was everything Elena was not. 26 years old, tall and striking with dark hair pulled into an elegant chignon, she commanded attention the moment she walked into a room. Her performance that evening had been flawless, her fingers dancing across the keys with supernatural speed and accuracy. When she finished, she stood and bowed with the confidence of someone who already knew she had won. But what the audience didn't know was that Vivian's connection to Jordan Blake went far beyond his company's sponsorship of the event. What they didn't know was that Elena's presence in that hall was an act of desperate courage. And what absolutely no one knew was that the head judge, the man who would decide Vivian's fate with his scoring, was Elena Harper's father. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all of their lives forever. To understand how Elena ended up in that concert hall, we need to go back 8 months to a time when her life looked completely different. Elena and Jordan Blake had been married for 3 years. On the surface, they seemed like the perfect couple. Jordan was building his tech empire, and Elena had put her own musical aspirations aside to support his dream. She managed their home, attended his business functions, and played the role of devoted wife with grace and authenticity. Because it wasn't a role. She genuinely loved him. Their apartment was a modern penthouse in the city's financial district, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that Jordan preferred. Elena had tried to make it feel like home, adding plants and photographs, but it always felt more like a showroom than a sanctuary. Still, she told herself that home was wherever they were together. The day she discovered she was pregnant, Elena's hands shook as she looked at the positive test. They had been trying for 6 months, and the news filled her with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She prepared an elaborate dinner that night, placing the pregnancy test in a small gift box next to Jordan's plate. When he came home loosening his tie as he walked through the door, she could barely contain her excitement. He opened the box, stared at the test for a long moment, and then his face broke into the widest smile she'd seen in months. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, telling her she'd just made him the happiest man alive. For a brief moment, Elena believed that this baby would bring them even closer together. She believed they were building something beautiful. But there was one person who didn't share her happiness. Professor William Harper. Her father had barely spoken to her since her wedding day. He had warned her about Jordan, told her that he saw something calculating in the young entrepreneur's eyes, something hollow beneath the charm. Elena had accused him of being overprotective, of never thinking anyone was good enough for his daughter. The argument that followed was devastating. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. They hadn't spoken properly in nearly 3 years. Now pregnant and hopeful, Elena thought about reaching out to him about healing that wound. But pride held her back, and so did fear. What if he rejected her again? What if he said he'd been right all along? So she kept the news to herself and focused on her marriage, on preparing for the baby, on believing that everything would be fine. She had no idea that her world was already beginning to crack. It started at a charity gala 4 months into her pregnancy. Jordan's company was sponsoring the event, which raised money for young musicians who couldn't afford quality instruments or instruction. Elena had begged off attending because morning sickness had evolved into all-day nausea, and the thought of standing in heels for hours while making small talk made her feel even worse. Jordan had assured her it was fine, that he understood that he'd represent them both. He kissed her forehead before he left, told her to rest, and promised to be home by midnight. She fell asleep on the couch watching old movies, content in the knowledge that her husband was doing good work in the world. What Elena didn't know was that Jordan met Vivian Cross that night. Vivian was performing at the gala, a young pianist on the rise who combined technical mastery with the kind of stage presence that made people lean forward in their seats. She played Chopin with such passion that the audience forgot to breathe. Jordan was mesmerized. After her performance, he made sure to introduce himself, offering the full force of his charm and business acumen. He told her about Blake Industries' commitment to the arts, about his personal appreciation for classical music, about his desire to support emerging talent. Vivian, ambitious and calculating in ways that matched Jordan's own instincts, recognized an opportunity when she saw one. Their conversation lasted well past midnight. Jordan didn't come home until 3 in the morning. When Elena, awake with worry, asked where he'd been, he told her the event had run late, that there had been networking opportunities he couldn't pass up. She believed him because she had no reason not to. Over the following weeks, Jordan's support for Vivian's career began in earnest. He positioned it as a business investment, telling Elena that sponsoring a rising classical music star would give Blake Industries valuable cultural credibility. He arranged for Vivian to perform at corporate events. He connected her with influential people in the music industry. He took meetings with her to discuss strategy and career planning. All of this might have been innocent if it had stopped there, but it didn't. Elena first noticed the change in Jordan's behavior during her 5th month of pregnancy. He was staying later at the office, traveling more frequently for business, and when he was home, he seemed distracted. His phone was always face down on the table. He started showering immediately when he got home from work, even if it was late. He made excuses to avoid physical intimacy, claiming he was stressed or tired. Elena told herself she was being paranoid that pregnancy hormones were making her imagine problems where none existed. Jordan was building a company. Of course, he was busy and stressed. She tried to be understanding to give him space while also preparing for their baby's arrival. Then she found the credit card statement. Jordan had always handled their finances, but Elena needed to order baby furniture and went looking for the credit card she thought was in Jordan's desk drawer. Instead, she found a statement for a card she didn't know existed. The charges told a story that made her blood run cold. Hotel rooms. Expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never been to together. Jewelry purchases from stores she'd never shopped at. Concert tickets. All of these expenses were itemized with dates and times that corresponded to nights Jordan had claimed to be working late or traveling for business. Her hands trembled as she looked at the dates. February 14th, Valentine's Day, when Jordan had texted her that he was stuck in meetings and would celebrate with her that weekend. The credit card showed a charge at the city's most expensive French restaurant and a luxury hotel suite that same night. March 10th, the evening of her 28th birthday, when he'd apologized profusely for having to fly to Chicago for an emergency. The statement showed no flight charges but did show dinner and a hotel in their own city. Elena sat in Jordan's home office, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other holding evidence of his betrayal, and felt her entire world collapse. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she started to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She wanted to believe there was some explanation, some innocent reason for all of this. But she knew better. In her heart, she had known for weeks that something was wrong. She had just been too afraid to look directly at the truth. That evening, when Jordan came home, she confronted him. She showed him the credit card statement with a steady hand, even though she was shaking inside. She watched his face carefully, waiting for confusion, for surprise, for some indication that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she saw guilt flash across his features before his expression hardened into something defensive. He didn't deny it immediately. He didn't rush to reassure her. He stood there in his expensive suit, his briefcase still in his hand, and calculated his next move. He tried to deflect, first asking why she had been going through his things, whether she didn't trust him, whether pregnancy was making her irrational. When she didn't back down, when she kept pushing for the truth, he finally admitted it. Not everything, but enough. Yes, he'd been seeing someone. It had started innocently, just professional networking. It meant nothing. It was a mistake he'd already ended. Elena asked who it was. Jordan refused to say. She asked if he loved this other woman. He said no, of course not. He loved Elena. She was his wife. She was carrying his child. But his words sounded hollow, rehearsed like lines from a script he'd prepared for exactly this moment. Elena told him to leave. She needed space to think, to process, to decide what to do. Jordan actually had the audacity to argue, saying this was his home too, that she couldn't just kick him out. The entitlement in his voice, the complete lack of genuine remorse, made something inside Elena harden into steel. She told him if he didn't leave voluntarily, she would call the police and report the credit card fraud, since he'd clearly been using shared assets for personal affairs without her knowledge or consent. It was a bluff, but Jordan didn't know that. He grabbed some clothes and left, slamming the door behind him. Elena spent that night alone in their penthouse, feeling their baby move inside her, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She thought about calling her father, but pride and old wounds kept her from picking up the phone. Instead, she cried herself to sleep on the couch, too exhausted to even make it to the bedroom. The next morning, everything got worse. Elena woke to her phone ringing. An unknown number. When she answered, a woman's voice, smooth and confident, introduced herself as Vivian Cross. The name meant nothing to Elena at first. Then Vivian explained who she was and why she was calling. Vivian told her that Jordan had confessed everything that he'd told Vivian about Elena's discovery. Then Vivian said something that made Elena's blood freeze. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to inform Elena that Jordan had made his choice, and he chose Vivian. He was leaving Elena. He just didn't have the courage to tell her himself yet, so Vivian was doing it for him. The cruelty in Vivian's voice was almost casual, like she was discussing the weather or a dinner reservation. She told Elena that Jordan needed someone who understood his ambitions, someone who could match his energy and drive, someone young and vital, not weighed down by domestic responsibilities, someone exciting. Elena, still groggy from sleep and emotionally devastated, managed to ask if Vivian knew she was pregnant. Vivian laughed. Of course she knew. Jordan had told her everything. That was actually perfect timing, Vivian said, because the baby would give Elena something to focus on while Jordan moved on with his life. Didn't Elena want Jordan to be happy? Elena hung up. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely press the button to end the call. She ran to the bathroom and vomited, though, whether from morning sickness or emotional shock. She couldn't tell. Over the next several days, Elena hired a private investigator. She needed to know the full truth to have documentation for what she knew was coming. The investigator worked quickly and efficiently, and what he discovered confirmed Elena's worst fears. Jordan and Vivian had been seeing each other for 4 months. They'd been careful using hotels outside the city, varying their routines, but the investigator had photographs time-stamped and geotagged. Jordan's arm around Vivian's waist as they entered a hotel, the two of them having dinner, their faces close together. Intimate. Jordan's car parked outside Vivian's apartment building overnight. The investigator also uncovered something else. Jordan had been funneling significant amounts of money into Vivian's career. He'd personally paid for her to work with prestigious piano coaches. He'd bought her a Steinway grand piano worth $80,000. He'd even put a down payment on an apartment for her in one of the city's most expensive buildings. All of this was done with money that should have been joint marital assets. Money that Elena had helped build through 3 years of managing their home, supporting his networking events, playing the devoted wife while he built his empire. Money that should have been securing their child's future. Elena took all the evidence and met with one of the city's top divorce attorneys. The attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, looked through everything and told Elena she had an excellent case. Jordan had violated his fiduciary duty to the marriage. The money he'd spent on Vivian could be recovered. Elena would be entitled to significant alimony and child support. The attorney was confident. But then Patricia asked about Elena's own resources. Did she have family who could support her during the divorce process? Did she have income of her own? Elena had to admit that she'd given up her career to support Jordan. She had no income, and her only family was a father she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Patricia was gentle, but honest. These cases could take months, sometimes years. Jordan had resources and would hire the best legal team money could buy. They would try to drag things out to pressure Elena into accepting less than she deserved. Could Elena handle that kind of prolonged battle while pregnant, and then caring for a newborn, Elena assured her she could. She had no choice. She needed to protect her child's future, and that meant fighting for what was rightfully theirs. The second confrontation with Jordan happened 3 days later. Elena had changed the locks on the penthouse, which was in both their names, but which she now considered her territory. Jordan showed up demanding to be let in, saying they needed to talk. Elena let him in, but only because she wanted to do this face to face. She told him she was filing for divorce. She told him she had evidence of his affair and his financial misconduct. She told him she would be seeking full custody of their child and the majority of their assets. Jordan's expression shifted from surprise to anger to calculation. He told her she was being emotional, that pregnancy was clouding her judgment, that they could work through this. When Elena didn't waver, his tone changed. He became threatening. He told her that he had the best lawyers in the city on retainer. He could drag this process out for years. He could make sure she got nothing. And as for custody, what judge would award a child to an unemployed woman with no support system when he could provide everything the child needed? Elena stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. She told him to do his worst. She would fight him with everything she had. Jordan left, but not before saying something that haunted Elena for weeks afterward. He looked at her, his eyes cold, and said that he'd made a mistake ever marrying her. She'd been fine when she was just the supportive wife, but now she was showing her true colors. Bitter, vindictive, difficult. He was glad Vivian had come into his life to remind him what it felt like to be with someone who actually brought joy instead of drama. The cruelty of it took Elena's breath away. 3 years of marriage reduced to that. Her love and loyalty dismissed as mere performance. Her pain at his betrayal reframed as unreasonable drama. She managed to hold her composure until he left, and then she collapsed onto the floor and sobbed. In the weeks that followed, Elena's life became a nightmare of legal proceedings and emotional devastation. Jordan made good on his threats, hiring a team of aggressive attorneys who filed motion after motion, trying to paint Elena as unstable and unfit for motherhood. They pointed to her estrangement from her father as evidence that she had difficulty maintaining relationships. They questioned her mental fitness, suggesting that pregnancy hormones were making her irrational. Meanwhile, Vivian made their relationship publicly official. She posted photos of herself and Jordan on social media looking radiant and happy. She gave interviews to classical music publications, thanking her generous sponsor Jordan Blake for believing in her talent. She played the role of the innocent party perfectly, the rising star who had simply fallen in love. There was no mention of the married pregnant woman whose life she'd helped destroy. Elena felt utterly alone. She'd lost her husband, her home security, and her faith in her own judgment. She spent nights lying awake, feeling her baby move, wondering how she would provide for this child on her own. She thought constantly about her father, about the fight they'd had, about his warnings that she'd dismissed. Pride kept her from reaching out, but also fear. What if he turned her away? What if he said he'd been right and offered no help beyond that cold satisfaction? Then 6 weeks before the piano competition, Elena received an unexpected piece of information from her attorney. Jordan had announced that Blake Industries would be the principal sponsor of the International Piano Excellence Competition. More than that, his girlfriend Vivian Cross would be competing. Patricia pointed out that this level of sponsorship gave Jordan significant influence over the event, potentially even over the judging. Elena did some research and felt her heart stop when she saw the list of judges. Professor William Harper, renowned piano pedagogue and head of the judging panel. Her father. The man she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The man who had warned her about Jordan and been proven devastatingly right. An idea began to form in Elena's mind. It was risky. It would require courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But it might be her only chance to expose Jordan and Vivian's corruption, to show the world who they really were. She decided she would attend the competition. She would be there to watch Vivian perform, and she would be there when the results were announced. She didn't have a plan beyond that, just a bone-deep need to bear witness, to not let them forget that she existed, that their actions had consequences. She didn't know that her decision to attend would lead to the most dramatic confrontation of her life. She didn't know that secrets long buried were about to explode into the open. And she had no idea that her father had been waiting for years for a chance to make things right with his daughter. The night of the competition finals, Elena dressed carefully in the only formal dress that still fit her pregnant body. It was simple, dark blue, elegant, but understated. She wanted to blend into the audience, not draw attention. Her plan, such as it was simply to be present, to remind Jordan that she existed, to watch Vivian perform and see with her own eyes what had destroyed her marriage. She arrived early and chose a seat in the middle section, far enough back that Jordan wouldn't spot her immediately, but close enough to see the stage clearly. The concert hall filled slowly with elegantly dressed patrons, their voices creating a refined murmur of anticipation. Elena watched them, all these people, who had no idea what dramas were playing out beneath the surface of this prestigious event. When Jordan arrived, Elena's breath caught. He looked exactly as he always had, confident and polished in an expensive suit. He was escorted to the VIP section where competition sponsors and major donors sat. He was alone, which surprised her until she realized that Vivian would be backstage preparing for her performance. The competition began with a brief welcome from the event organizer, followed by the announcement of the judges. Elena's heart clenched when her father was introduced. Professor William Harper stood and acknowledged the applause with a dignified nod. He looked older than she remembered his hair, more silver lines around his eyes she didn't recall. But his bearing was the same, that quiet authority he'd always possessed. She wondered if he would have agreed to judge this competition if he'd known about Jordan's sponsorship. She wondered if he even knew that his daughter's marriage had fallen apart. They existed in completely separate worlds, now connected only by blood and painful history. The first finalist performed Beethoven's Tempest Sonata with remarkable passion. The second played Liszt with technical prowess that drew appreciative murmurs from the audience. The third finalist chose Chopin, the fourth selected Prokofiev. Each performance was extraordinary in its own way, showcasing the incredible talent assembled for this competition. Then Vivian Cross took the stage. Elena had seen photos of her, of course, but seeing her in person was different. Vivian was striking, there was no denying it. She moved with balletic grace, her floor-length black gown creating dramatic lines as she crossed the stage. She sat at the piano with perfect posture, her hands hovering over the keys for a moment before beginning. She had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally powerful pieces in the repertoire. From the first notes, it was clear that Vivian was a formidable pianist. Her fingers flew across the keys with supernatural speed and precision. She navigated the most complex passages without hesitation, her technique flawless. The audience was mesmerized. Even Elena, with all her anger and pain, couldn't deny that Vivian had genuine talent. This wasn't just the performance of an ambitious woman sleeping her way to success. This was real artistry, real skill cultivated over years of dedicated practice. It made everything somehow worse, knowing that Vivian didn't need to steal someone's husband to succeed. She could have made it on talent alone. She'd chosen cruelty anyway. When Vivian finished, the audience erupted in applause. She stood and bowed, her face radiant with confidence. She knew she'd performed brilliantly. She knew the grand prize was hers. Jordan was standing in the VIP section, clapping enthusiastically, his pride obvious. Vivian's eyes found him in the crowd, and she smiled a private smile, meant just for him. Elena felt physically ill watching the exchange. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick, drawing strength from that small life inside her. She had come here for a reason. She would see this through. After all 5 finalists had performed, there was an intermission while the judges deliberated. Elena stayed in her seat, not trusting her legs to carry her through a crowd. She watched as Jordan left his seat, presumably heading backstage. Her heart raced at the thought that he might see her, might confront her, but he never looked in her direction. What Elena didn't know was that backstage a drama was already unfolding. Jordan had indeed gone back to congratulate Vivian, finding her in her private dressing room. She was still flushed with the adrenaline of performance, certain of her victory. They embraced Jordan, telling her she'd been magnificent, that the prize was surely hers. Vivian laughed, saying she knew that there was no way any of the other performers could match what she'd just done. Then someone knocked on the dressing room door. It was one of the competition staff, informing Vivian that there would be a slight delay in announcing the results. The judges were taking longer than expected. Vivian's confidence wavered for just a moment. Why would they need extra time if her victory was obvious? Jordan reassured her. It was just a formality. They probably had to discuss the other placements. She had nothing to worry about. But even as he said it, he felt a small seed of doubt. He'd donated $250,000 to this competition. Surely that meant something. Surely they wouldn't dare. Meanwhile, in the judges' deliberation room, a heated discussion was taking place. Professor William Harper sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other distinguished musicians and pedagogues. They had just finished their second round of scoring, and the results were not what everyone expected. One of the judges, a renowned concert pianist named Dr. Jeffrey Mills, was arguing passionately for Vivian Cross. Her technical execution had been perfect, he insisted. Not a single missed note, not a moment of hesitation. The Rachmaninoff was one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire, and she'd played it flawlessly. Surely that warranted the top prize. But Professor Harper had reservations, and he wasn't alone. Another judge, an elderly woman named Maestro Elena Sokolov, agreed with him. Yes, Vivian's technique was impeccable. But technique wasn't everything. Music was supposed to move the soul, not just impress the ear. Vivian's performance, for all its precision, had felt cold, calculated. She had played the notes perfectly, but had failed to capture the emotional depth of Rachmaninoff's composition. There was another finalist, a 19-year-old named Ana Martinez, who had played with less technical perfection, but with genuine feeling. Her interpretation of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 had brought tears to several audience members' eyes. She'd made a few small mistakes, moments where her fingers hadn't quite executed what her heart wanted to express, but the emotion had been authentic. The music had breathed. Professor Harper argued that this was what great piano playing was about. Not robotic perfection, but the ability to channel human emotion through the instrument. Ana Martinez had done that. Vivian Cross had not. The discussion went back and forth for nearly 40 minutes. In the end, when votes were tallied, the result was clear. Ana Martinez would receive first prize. Vivian Cross would receive an honorable mention and a special technical achievement award, acknowledging her remarkable skill while recognizing that she hadn't achieved the emotional depth required for the top honor. Dr. Mills warned that this decision would be controversial. Vivian Cross had powerful supporters, including the competition's main sponsor. There could be backlash. Professor Harper's response was simple and firm. The integrity of the competition was more important than any donor's preferences. They were judges of musical artistry, not puppets for wealthy benefactors. The decision stood. Back in the concert hall, the intermission was ending. Elena watched as audience members returned to their seats, the anticipation palpable. Jordan returned to the VIP section, his expression confident. Elena could see him texting on his phone, probably messaging Vivian. The event organizer returned to the stage and announced that the judges had reached their decision. The awards would be presented in ascending order, starting with honorable mentions and special awards, then third place, second place, and finally first place. Each announcement would be accompanied by a brief performance by the winner. The first few awards were announced to polite applause. Then came the honorable mentions. When Vivian Cross's name was called, there was a moment of confused silence in the audience. An honorable mention for the performance that had seemed so clearly superior. Backstage, Vivian heard her name and felt the world tilt. An honorable mention. Not even a placing, just an acknowledgement. She stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what she'd heard. Then rage, pure and molten, surged through her. This was impossible. She had played perfectly, every note, every phrase flawless. How dare they? She walked onto the stage mechanically, her face a mask that barely concealed her fury. She accepted the certificate and small trophy with hands that shook slightly. The event organizer mentioned the Special Technical Achievement Award, praising her remarkable skill. The words meant nothing to her. This was an insult, not an honor. As she stood there, the event organizer invited Professor Harper to say a few words about the honorable mention recipients. The professor stood, and his words would later echo in Vivian's mind like a curse. He spoke about the difference between technical mastery and artistic truth. He said that perfect execution of notes was admirable, but music required something more. It required soul. It required the ability to make the audience feel something genuine, not just admire something impressive. He wasn't looking at Vivian as he said this. He was looking at the audience in general. But she knew. Everyone knew. He was talking about her. He was saying that despite her perfect performance, she had failed at the one thing that mattered most. The ceremony continued. Third place went to the pianist who had played Prokofiev. Second place went to the Liszt performer. The audience was leaning forward now, curious about who could possibly have beaten Vivian Cross's technically perfect performance. When Ana Martinez's name was announced as first place, there were gasps throughout the audience. Ana, a 19-year-old from a small town in New Mexico, who had played with passion but imperfect technique, had won the International Piano Excellence Competition. She walked on stage looking stunned, tears streaming down her face. Her performance had been beautiful, but few had expected the judges to value emotion over technical precision. Professor Harper stood again to explain the decision. He spoke about Chopin's intention behind the ballade, about the story the music was meant to tell. He said that Ana had understood that story in her bones and had shared it with everyone in the hall. She had made mistakes, yes, but those mistakes were human, and they had somehow made the performance more moving, not less. Music, he said, was not about perfection. It was about truth. Elena, sitting in her seat in the middle section, felt tears streaming down her own face. She had forgotten, in the years since she'd stopped playing piano, what music was supposed to be about. She had forgotten her father's lessons about playing from the heart, not just the fingers. Hearing him speak now, she felt a longing so intense it was almost painful. She had missed him. God, she had missed him so much. But she didn't have time to dwell on that feeling, because suddenly there was a commotion near the stage. Vivian Cross, who had been standing in the wings waiting to congratulate the other winners as protocol demanded, was pushing her way back onto the stage. Her face was contorted with rage, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. She approached the judges' table, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden stage floor. She pointed at Professor Harper and began shouting. Her words echoed through the microphone system, shocking the refined audience into stunned silence. She accused him of bias. She said the judging was rigged. She demanded to know if someone had paid him off if Ana Martinez had connections he was protecting. How dare he say her playing lacked soul? Who was he to make that judgment? She had devoted her entire life to the piano. She had sacrificed everything for her art, and he was giving the prize to some amateur from nowhere who had made mistakes. Security guards started moving toward the stage, but Vivian wasn't finished. She grabbed the microphone from the stunned event organizer and addressed the audience directly. She told them this was a farce, that the competition was corrupt, that the judges were incompetent. She would not accept this insult to her talent and her years of hard work. Professor Harper stood calmly waiting for her tirade to end. When security finally reached her and gently tried to escort her from the stage, she resisted, still shouting. And then her eyes swept across the audience and landed on a face that made everything click into place in her mind. Elena Harper, 7 months pregnant, sitting in the middle section, tears on her face. Jordan's wife, the woman whose life Vivian had helped destroy. The woman who had every reason to want revenge. In Vivian's rage-addled mind, a conspiracy formed instantly. Elena must have come here deliberately. Elena must have contacted the judges, must have told them about her relationship with Jordan, must have poisoned them against her. That's why she didn't win. Not because her performance lacked soul, but because Elena had sabotaged her. Vivian wrenched herself free from the security guards and jumped off the stage. She moved through the audience with frightening speed, her eyes locked on Elena. People scrambled out of her way, sensing danger. Jordan in the VIP section stood up, finally realizing what was happening, shouting Vivian's name. Elena saw her coming and tried to stand to get away, but she was 7 months pregnant and wedged between seats. There was nowhere to go. She could only watch as Vivian reached her fury, radiating from every line of her body. Vivian grabbed Elena by the shoulders and screamed in her face. "You did this! You ruined everything! You told them, didn't you? You poisoned them against me!" Elena, terrified, tried to pull away. "I didn't! I don't know what you're talking about. I just came to watch. I didn't speak to anyone." But Vivian wasn't listening. She was beyond reason, beyond rational thought. All she could see was the woman she blamed for her humiliation standing there pregnant and pathetic, looking at her with those frightened eyes. Something in Vivian snapped completely. She shoved Elena hard with both hands. Elena, unbalanced by her pregnancy and unable to brace herself properly, fell backward. Her head struck the armrest of the seat behind her with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the floor, her hands instinctively going to her belly, a cry of pain escaping her lips. Blood began to trickle from a gash above Elena's eyebrow, where her head had made contact with the hard edge of the seat. The baby inside her kicked frantically, as if sensing its mother's distress. Elena's vision swam, pain radiating through her skull. She could hear screaming, shouting, the thunder of footsteps, but it all seemed distant and muffled. Vivian stood over her and for a moment seemed to realize what she'd done. Horror flickered across her face. Then defiance replaced it. She opened her mouth to say something else, but never got the chance. A roar of pure fury erupted from the stage. "Get away from her! Professor William Harper had vaulted over the judge's table with an agility that shocked everyone watching. He ran through the audience, shoving people aside, his face transformed by an rage more intense than anyone had ever seen from the composed professor. Security guards who tried to intercept Vivian found themselves pushed aside as the elderly professor reached his target. He placed himself between Vivian and Elena, his body a shield. Then he dropped to his knees beside the woman on the floor, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her, afraid of causing more harm. "Elena," he whispered, and his voice cracked on her name. "Oh God, Elena." The concert hall went completely silent. Every person in that audience, every musician backstage, every security guard and usher stood frozen, processing what they had just heard. Professor William Harper, the distinguished head judge, had just called the pregnant woman on the floor Elena, his daughter's name. Jordan Blake, still standing in the VIP section, felt the blood drain from his face. Professor Harper was Elena's father. The head judge was his wife's father. The man who had just denied Vivian the first prize was his estranged father-in-law. The connections, the implications, crashed over him like a wave. Vivian, still held by security guards, went pale. She had just violently attacked the daughter of the head judge. The pregnant daughter, in front of hundreds of witnesses, in front of cameras that had been recording the entire event. The magnitude of what she'd done began to penetrate her rage. Professor Harper gently touched Elena's face, his fingers coming away bloody from the cut on her forehead. Elena's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto her father's face. She saw the tears streaming down his cheeks, saw the anguish in his eyes, and something inside her that had been frozen for 3 years finally thawed. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm sorry. You were right. About everything. I should have listened." "Shh, sweetheart, don't talk. You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay." His voice was thick with emotion, his hands shaking as he cradled her head carefully. "I'm here now. I've got you. Nobody's going to hurt you again." Someone in the audience had already called for an ambulance. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. The event organizer was trying to restore some kind of order, asking people to please stay calm, to give them space. But the audience was in chaos, everyone talking at once, cell phones out, recording the unbelievable scene unfolding before them. Professor Harper held his daughter's hand, oblivious to the hundreds of people watching. He spoke to her in a low, urgent voice, telling her to stay still, that help was coming, that everything would be all right. Elena, drifting in and out of focus from the head injury, gripped his hand like a lifeline. The paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing into the concert hall with a stretcher and medical equipment. Professor Harper reluctantly stepped back to let them work, but he never let go of Elena's hand. The paramedics quickly assessed her condition, checking her pupils, taking her vital signs, placing a neck brace as a precaution. "Sir, are you family?" one of the paramedics asked Professor Harper. "I'm her father," he said, his voice steady despite the tears still streaming down his face. "You can ride with us to the hospital. We need to move quickly. The head injury is concerning, and we need to monitor the baby." They loaded Elena onto the stretcher carefully. As they moved toward the exit, Professor Harper, walking alongside Elena's eyes, suddenly widened. "Jordan," she said. "Where's Jordan?" Professor Harper's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. He looked out over the audience until he spotted his son-in-law still standing in the VIP section, looking pale and uncertain. Their eyes met across the distance, and Professor Harper's glare could have melted steel. "Stay away from my daughter, Professor Harper," said his voice carrying through the silent hall. "If you come near her again, if you even think about her, I will destroy you. Do you understand me?" Jordan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked around at all the people watching at the cameras still recording and realized that his entire world had just collapsed. His sponsorship of the competition, his relationship with Vivian, his treatment of his pregnant wife, all of it was about to become public knowledge in the worst possible way. The paramedics wheeled Elena out, Professor Harper following close behind. The last thing the audience heard was his voice, gentle again, reassuring his daughter that she was safe now that he would take care of everything. Behind them, Vivian Cross stood between two security guards, her wrists now in handcuffs. The police had arrived along with the ambulance, and someone had already explained what had happened. An officer was reading her rights while she stood in shocked silence, the reality of her situation finally penetrating. She had committed assault and battery on a pregnant woman in front of hundreds of witnesses. There was no talking her way out of this. No amount of talent or charm would save her now. Jordan tried to approach her to say something, but the police stopped him. "Sir, please step back. Are you associated with this individual?" Jordan looked at Vivian, at the woman he'd destroyed his marriage for, and made a choice that revealed everything about his character. "No," he said. "I barely know her. She's just a pianist my company sponsored." Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his in disbelief. "Jordan, what are you doing? Tell them we're together. Tell them this was all a misunderstanding." But Jordan was already backing away, already calculating how to distance himself from this disaster. He shook his head at the officer. "I have no personal relationship with this woman. I'm the competition sponsor, that's all." The betrayal on Vivian's face was absolute. She lunged toward him, but the security guards held her firm. She screamed his name, calling him a coward, a liar, demanding that he help her. But Jordan just turned and walked away, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The police led Vivian out through a side exit, away from the main crowd. As she passed through the backstage area, she saw Anna Martinez, the young woman who had won first prize, watching with what frightened eyes. Vivian wanted to say something cruel, something cutting, but the words wouldn't come. She had lost everything in a single moment of rage. Her career, her freedom, her relationship, her reputation, all of it gone. At the hospital, Elena was rushed into emergency care. Professor Harper paced the waiting room, his phone pressed to his ear as he made call after call. First to his own attorney explaining the situation, demanding immediate legal action. Then to colleagues canceling commitments, rearranging his schedule. Nothing mattered except his daughter and grandchild. A doctor finally emerged after what felt like hours. "Mr. Harper, your daughter is going to be fine. She has a concussion and needed several stitches for the laceration on her forehead. But there's no skull fracture, no brain bleeding. We're keeping her overnight for observation, but her prognosis is good." "And the baby?" Professor Harper's voice shook. The doctor smiled. "The baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, active movement. Your daughter did exactly the right thing by protecting her abdomen when she fell. The baby wasn't impacted." Professor Harper actually sagged with relief, having to catch himself on a nearby chair. "Can I see her? She's asking for you. Room 312. Professor Harper found Elena in a hospital bed, looking small and vulnerable, with a white bandage wrapped around her head. An IV drip fed into her arm, and monitors beeped quietly, tracking her vitals and the baby's heartbeat. When she saw her father, she started crying again. He rushed to her bedside, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I let my pride keep us apart. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from that man." Elena shook her head, wincing at the movement. "You tried to warn me. I wouldn't listen. I was so sure I knew better. I thought you just couldn't see how much we loved each other. I was wrong about everything." "When did it start falling apart?" Professor Harper asked gently, and Elena told him. everything. The affair, the discovery, the confrontation, the divorce proceedings, Jordan's threats, all the things she'd been carrying alone for months. Her father listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation, his hand tightening around hers. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know people. Good people. The kind of lawyers who eat men like Jordan Blake for breakfast. I'm calling them tonight. By the time we're done, he won't have a penny to his name. And he'll never get anywhere near your child. Dad, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. This is what fathers do. We protect our children. I failed at that once. I won't fail again." Elena squeezed his hand. "I missed you so much. I missed you too, sweetheart. Every single day." He paused, then added quietly, "I have something to confess. I knew. Not about the affair specifically, but I knew something was wrong with your marriage. I saw Jordan at a restaurant 6 months ago with a young woman who was definitely not you. I was going to call you to say something, but I was afraid you'd think I was just trying to interfere again. I convinced myself I was wrong, that I was seeing problems where there were none because I'd never liked him. I should have called. I should have reached out." "You couldn't have stopped it," Elena said. "This was always going to happen. Jordan is who he is. At least now I know. At least now I can protect my baby from growing up thinking that's what love looks like." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, years of estrangement beginning to heal in that quiet hospital room. Outside, the world was exploding with news of what had happened at the competition. Videos of Vivian's attack had already gone viral. News outlets were scrambling to piece together the story, the scandal of it all too juicy to ignore. Professor Harper's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, concerned friends. He ignored them all except for one. His attorney, Robert Chen, one of the top family law specialists in the country. Robert listened to everything Professor Harper told him, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When the professor finished, Robert was silent for a moment. Then he said, "This is good. I know that sounds callous, given what your daughter has been through, but from a legal standpoint, this is very good. We have assault on a pregnant woman, documented infidelity, financial misconduct with marital assets, and now abandonment since Blake publicly denied his relationship with the perpetrator. A judge is going to crucify him. I want full custody for Elena," Professor Harper said. "I want every penny he's spent on that woman recovered. I want him to pay for what he's done." "Consider it done," Robert said. "I'll file emergency motions first thing tomorrow morning. Given the assault tonight and the criminal charges pending, we can probably get a restraining order keeping Blake away from your daughter. Then we go after everything else." Over the next several hours, while Elena slept fitfully in her hospital bed, the legal machinery began to grind into motion. Robert Chen worked through the night preparing documents, marshalling evidence, building a case that would leave Jordan Blake with nothing. Meanwhile, across the city, Jordan sat alone in his penthouse apartment, watching his life unraveling in real time on social media. The videos of Vivian attacking Elena were everywhere. His name was attached to every post, every article. Tech mogul's Mistress attacks his pregnant wife. Piano competition scandal, sponsors affair, exposed in violent assault. Judge reveals injured woman is his daughter after violent attack. His phone was ringing constantly with calls from board members, investors, business partners. Blake Industries stock was already dropping in after-hours trading. His secretary had quit via text message. 3 major clients had sent termination notices. Everything he'd built over the past decade was collapsing because of his association with Vivian Cross. He thought about calling Elena, about trying to explain, to apologize, to somehow salvage something from this disaster. But he couldn't think of a single thing to say that wouldn't make everything worse. He'd abandoned Vivian, publicly denying their relationship to save himself. He'd stood by and watched while she was arrested. What could he possibly say to Elena that would matter after that display of cowardice? For the first time in his life, Jordan Blake had no moves left to make. No charm offensive, no business strategy, no manipulation that could fix this. He had lost completely and utterly. And he'd done it to himself. At the city jail, Vivian Cross sat in a holding cell, still wearing her concert gown, now wrinkled and stained. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose, falling around her face in tangles. She stared at the concrete wall, replaying the night's events over and over, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so fast. She'd been so certain she would win. The performance had been perfect. Every note, every phrase exactly as she'd practiced thousands of times. How had it not been enough? How had some teenager from nowhere beaten her? And then the rage had taken over, and she'd done something unforgivable. She'd attacked a pregnant woman. She could still feel Elena's shoulders under her hands, could still hear the crack of her head hitting the seat, could still see the blood. What had she been thinking? She hadn't been thinking. That was the problem. She'd let her ambition, her need to win, override everything else. And now she would pay for it. A public defender had already visited her, explaining the charges. Assault and battery. Assault on a pregnant woman, which made it worse. All of it captured on camera in front of hundreds of witnesses. The lawyer was honest with her. There was no defense. Her best bet was to plead guilty, show remorse, and hope for leniency. Vivian asked about Jordan. The lawyer shook her head. He'd already released a statement through his attorneys denying any personal relationship with her, characterizing their connection as purely professional sponsorship. He was throwing her to the wolves to protect himself. Vivian laughed when she heard that a bitter, broken sound. She'd destroyed a marriage for him. She'd pinned her future on his promises of support and connection. And at the first sign of trouble, he'd abandoned her without a second thought. She'd been a fool. They'd both been fools, she and Elena. Jordan Blake didn't love anyone but himself. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 days later. Vivian was denied bail, the judge citing the severity of the assault and the public outcry as risk factors. She would remain in custody until trial. Her attorney estimated she was looking at 3 to 6 months in jail, possibly more, if the judge wanted to make an example of her. Her career was over. That much was certain. No concert hall would book her. No competition would accept her. No recording label would touch her. She was 26 years old, and her life was effectively finished, destroyed in a single moment of uncontrolled rage. Back at the hospital, Elena was released the next morning with strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. Professor Harper took her home, not to the penthouse she'd shared with Jordan, but to his own house, a beautiful Victorian in a quiet neighborhood where Elena had grown up. Walking through that front door felt like stepping back in time. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The piano in the living room where she'd practiced for hours as a child. The window seat where she'd read books on rainy afternoons. The kitchen where her father had taught her to make his mother's recipe for apple pie. "Your room is ready," Professor Harper said. "I never changed it. I kept hoping." He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. He'd kept hoping she'd come back. For 3 years, while they hadn't spoken, he'd maintained her childhood room like a shrine to the daughter he'd lost. The thought made her cry all over again. Over the following days, Elena rested and healed while her father and his attorney waged war on Jordan Blake. The legal motions came fast and furious. Emergency custody order granting Elena sole custody of the unborn child. Restraining order keeping Jordan at least 500 feet away from Elena at all times. Asset freeze preventing Jordan from moving or hiding money that was considered marital property. Each motion was granted, The judges reading about the assault at the competition and Jordan's subsequent abandonment of Vivian were not inclined to give him any benefit of the doubt. His own actions had painted him as unreliable, untrustworthy, and potentially dangerous. The financial discovery revealed the full extent of Jordan's spending on Vivian. The $80,000 piano, the apartment down payment, the coaching fees, the jewelry. All of it added up to over $300,000 of marital assets spent on his mistress. Robert Chen filed claims to recover every penny. Jordan's attorney tried to fight back, but they had nothing to work with. Jordan's credibility was destroyed. His characterization of himself as a successful businessman was undermined by the financial evidence showing reckless spending and poor judgment. His claim that he could provide better for the child than Elena was laughable, given that Elena now had her father's full support, both emotional and financial. The divorce proceedings moved with unusual speed. Normally, these cases dragged on for months or years, but Robert Chen had leverage that most attorneys could only dream of. Jordan wanted this to go away. He wanted to stop the bleeding to salvage what was left of his reputation and his company. So when Robert offered a settlement, Jordan's attorneys recommended he take it. The terms were brutal. Elena would receive 60% of all marital assets, including her choice of properties. She would receive alimony for 10 years. She would receive child support based on Jordan's peak earnings, not his current diminished income. And Jordan would have no custody rights whatsoever, only supervised visitation if and when Elena chose to allow it. Jordan signed the papers without even reading them. What choice did he have? The alternative was going to trial, where all of this would be aired publicly again, where his mistakes would be cataloged and analyzed and judged. At least this way, it would be over. Blake Industries never recovered from the scandal. Major clients left. Investors pulled out. The board forced Jordan to step down as CEO. The company was eventually sold at a fraction of its former value. Jordan, who had once been worth tens of millions, found himself with barely enough to afford a modest apartment and basic living expenses. He tried to rebuild to start over, but his reputation was poison. Nobody wanted to do business with the man who'd cheated on his pregnant wife and then abandoned his mistress when she faced criminal charges. He couldn't escape his own story. Vivian Cross was sentenced to 90 days in jail, followed by 3 years of probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from Elena and her family. She served her sentence quietly, never speaking to the media, never offering excuses. When she was released, she found that Jordan had been telling the truth when he said he barely knew her. He'd moved, changed his number, and refused all contact. She'd been useful to him once, and then she'd become a liability. Now she was nothing. She tried to return to music, but the doors were all closed. She eventually left the city, moving back to her hometown in the Midwest. She took a job as an administrative assistant and gave piano lessons to children in the evenings. She never performed professionally again. Sometimes late at night, she would sit at her old upright piano and play quietly, remembering what it felt like to command a stage to make an audience hold its breath. But those memories were poisoned now, forever associated with the worst mistake of her life. Eventually, she stopped playing altogether. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, turned with surprising speed. Vivian Cross's preliminary hearing took place just 3 days after the assault. She appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, simply all traces of the glamorous pianist gone. The transformation was startling. This was no longer the confident performer who had commanded a stage. This was a frightened young woman facing the consequences of a moment of uncontrolled rage. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Multiple camera angles had captured the entire incident. Hundreds of witnesses had seen everything. The prosecution presented medical reports showing Elena's injuries, photographs of the blood on the concert hall floor, and testimony from paramedics who had treated her at the scene. There was no possible defense. Vivian's public defender, a tired-looking woman named Sarah Mills, who had seen too many cases like this, advised her client to plead guilty and throw herself on the mercy of the court. Fighting the charges would only make things worse, waste the court's time, and likely result in a harsher sentence. Vivian, defeated and alone, agreed. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Elena attended sitting in the front row of the courtroom with her father beside her. Her head injury had healed, leaving only a small scar above her eyebrow that her hair covered. But the emotional wounds were still fresh, and facing Vivian again required every ounce of courage she possessed. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence. This wasn't a simple assault. This was a violent attack on a pregnant woman in public in front of hundreds of witnesses, including children. The defendant had shown no remorse in the immediate aftermath, had attempted to justify her actions, and had only shown contrition after being arrested and facing consequences. The state requested 6 months in jail, followed by probation and mandatory anger management therapy. Vivian's attorney argued for leniency. Her client was a first-time offender with no criminal history. She had been under extreme emotional stress, having just experienced a devastating professional disappointment. She had already lost everything: her career, her reputation, her relationship, her future prospects. Wasn't that punishment enough? The defense requested probation, community service, and therapy with no jail time. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, named Judge Patricia Morrison, listened to both arguments carefully. Then she asked Vivian if she had anything to say before sentencing. Vivian stood, her hands trembling. She looked across the courtroom at Elena, and for the first time since the attack, their eyes met directly. What Elena saw there wasn't defiance or hatred anymore. It was shame, deep and profound. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I did was unforgivable. I let my ego, my ambition, my jealousy turn me into someone I don't recognize. I hurt you. I endangered your baby. And I did it in front of your father, in front of everyone. There's no excuse for that. There's no justification. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." She paused, swallowing hard. "I've had a lot of time to think over the past few weeks, about the choices I made, about the person I became. I destroyed your marriage, and I'm sorry for that too. I told myself that if Jordan was willing to cheat, the marriage must not have been worth saving. But that was a lie I told myself to feel better about my own actions. You didn't deserve any of this, and I'm truly deeply sorry." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. Part of her wanted to accept the apology, to believe in the possibility of redemption. But another part, the part that still felt the phantom pain of that attack, the part that still woke up at night from nightmares of falling, couldn't quite get there yet. She nodded slightly, acknowledging Vivian's words, but not quite forgiving them. Judge Morrison delivered her sentence with careful deliberation. She acknowledged Vivian's remorse, but noted that it had come only after facing legal consequences. She pointed out that assault on a pregnant woman was a serious crime that endangered 2 lives, not just one. She emphasized that talent and previous good behavior didn't excuse violence. The sentence: 90 days in county jail, 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management therapy for 1 year, and a permanent restraining order preventing Vivian from coming within 500 feet of Elena or any member of her family. Additionally, Vivian would be required to pay all of Elena's medical expenses related to the attack. Vivian accepted the sentence without protest. She was led away by bailiffs, and Elena watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but there was no joy in watching another human being's life collapse, even someone who had caused so much pain. But the legal proceedings weren't finished. Elena's divorce case was moving forward simultaneously, and Jordan Blake was discovering that his wealth and connections couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own choices. The divorce attorney that Professor Harper had retained, Robert Chen, was ruthless and brilliant. He had built his reputation on taking down wealthy men who thought they were untouchable, and Jordan was exactly the type of client Robert loved to face across a negotiating table. The evidence of Jordan's affair was ironclad. The private investigator's photos, the credit card statements, the hotel records, all of it painted a clear picture of systematic deception and financial misconduct. Jordan had spent over $300,000 of marital assets on Vivian without Elena's knowledge or consent. That alone gave Robert substantial leverage. But what really destroyed Jordan's position was his own behavior at the piano competition. Video footage of him denying any relationship with Vivian after she'd been arrested had gone viral. Social media had erupted with condemnation of his cowardice. Business partners had seen him abandon someone he'd claimed to care about the moment she became a liability. If he could betray his wife, and then his mistress with such casual cruelty, who could trust him? Blake Industries was hemorrhaging money. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts within days of the scandal. 2 board members had resigned. Investors were pulling out. The company's valuation had dropped by 40% in 2 weeks. Jordan's personal net worth, once estimated at $75 million, was plummeting. Robert Chen smelled blood in the water. He filed for emergency custody orders, asset freezes, and temporary support payments. He demanded full financial disclosure, knowing that the deeper they dug into Jordan's finances, the more misconduct they would find. He was right. Jordan had been hiding money in offshore accounts, underreporting income, and engaging in questionable business practices that wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. Faced with the prospect of a lengthy, expensive trial that would expose all of his financial irregularities, Jordan's attorneys advised him to settle. They negotiated for weeks, but Robert Chen wouldn't budge on the essential points. Elena would get primary custody, actually sole custody, with Jordan having only supervised visitation rights at Elena's discretion. She would receive 60% of all marital assets. She would receive alimony for 10 years. She would receive child support based on Jordan's peak earnings, not his current diminished income. Jordan signed the settlement agreement in his attorney's office, his hand shaking with suppressed rage. He'd lost more than half his fortune. He'd lost his company, his reputation, and any meaningful relationship with his child. All of it gone because he couldn't keep his wedding vows, because he'd prioritized excitement over integrity. His attorneys tried to console him. At least he'd avoided criminal charges. At least the settlement protected him from further claims. At least he could rebuild his life and career from here. But Jordan knew the truth. In the circles where he'd once been powerful, he was now a pariah. No one wanted to associate with a man who'd cheated on his pregnant wife and then publicly betrayed his mistress. His name was poison. Blake Industries was sold to a competitor for a fraction of its former value. Jordan cleared about $12 million after debts were paid, and the settlement was finalized. It was still more money than most people would see in a lifetime, but for someone who'd once been worth $75 million, it felt like poverty. He moved into a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, a far cry from the penthouse he'd shared with Elena. He took a job as a consultant for a mid-sized tech firm, making a salary instead of running his own empire. His days of power lunches and exclusive galas were over. Now he ate lunch at his desk and went home to an empty house every night. He thought about Elena constantly, about the life they'd had, the future they'd planned, about Lily, the daughter he would never really know. His attorney had explained the supervised visitation terms. If Elena chose to allow it, Jordan could see his daughter for a few hours at a time in a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. The supervisor would file reports. Any inappropriate behavior would result in visitation being revoked permanently. Jordan had never exercised that right. The thought of seeing his daughter under those circumstances as a supervised stranger, not a father, was too humiliating. He told himself he was protecting Lily from confusion from having to know a father who was basically a stranger. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He was ashamed. He couldn't face his daughter knowing what he'd done to her mother. Meanwhile, Vivian served her 90-day sentence in county jail. The experience was brutal. She was housed in a general population unit with women who had committed far more serious crimes. Her cellmate was serving time for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The other inmates quickly learned who Vivian was. The news coverage of her case had been extensive, and they had no sympathy for someone who'd attacked a pregnant woman. Vivian kept her head down, attended her mandatory therapy sessions, and counted the days. The therapist assigned to her case, Dr. Rachel Stevens, was actually helpful. She pushed Vivian to examine the roots of her rage, her obsessive need to win, her inability to handle disappointment. They traced patterns back to Vivian's childhood, to a demanding mother who had pushed her to excel at piano from age 4, who had made love conditional on achievement. Vivian had never learned to value herself separate from her accomplishments. When Professor Harper had essentially told her that her technically perfect performance lacked soul, it had struck at the core of her identity. She'd spent her entire life being told that if she just practiced harder, played more perfectly, won more competitions, she would finally be enough. And in one moment, a judge had told her that perfection wasn't enough, that she fundamentally wasn't enough. The rage that had exploded onto Elena wasn't really about Elena at all. It was decades of pressure and inadequacy and conditional love erupting all at once. None of that excused what she'd done, but it helped her understand it, and understanding was the first step toward change. When Vivian was released after serving her full sentence, she was a different person. Quieter, humbler. She'd lost 20 pounds from jail food and stress. Her skin was pale from lack of sunlight. Her hair, which she'd once maintained with expensive treatments, was dull and brittle. She looked older than her 26 years. Her career in classical piano was finished. Every competition had banned her. No concert hall would book her. No recording label would sign her. The classical music community, which valued elegance and refinement, had no place for someone who'd committed such public violence. She moved back to her hometown in Indiana, a small city she'd left at 18 to pursue her piano dreams in the big city. She moved in with her mother, the same woman whose impossible standards had shaped her into someone willing to destroy others to succeed. The irony wasn't lost on her. She found work as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company. The pay was modest, the work boring. Her co-workers didn't know about her past as a concert pianist or her criminal record. She was just Vivian, the quiet woman in accounting who kept to herself. She bought an old upright piano from a classified ad and placed it in her small apartment. Sometimes late at night she would play very softly so as not to disturb her neighbors. She played the pieces she'd once performed on grand stages Rachmaninoff-Chopin Liszt. But now she played them differently. Without the pressure of competition, without the need to impress, she could finally hear the music itself. The beauty, the emotion, the soul that Professor Harper had said was missing. She would never perform professionally again. That dream was dead-killed by her own hands on a concert stage. But she could still play. And in the privacy of her small apartment with no one to judge or evaluate, she finally learned to play for the right reasons. Not for glory or prizes or approval, just for the music itself. She thought about Jordan sometimes, the man who had promised to support her career, who had seemed to offer everything she wanted. He never tried to contact her after her arrest. No letters, no visits, no support of any kind. She'd been useful to him for a while, and then she'd become a liability, and he'd discarded her without hesitation. She'd done the same to Elena, really. They'd both been willing to destroy an innocent woman for their own selfish purposes, and they'd both paid the price. Years later, someone would ask Vivian if she regretted attacking Elena. She would say yes, absolutely. That moment had destroyed 2 lives, Elena's sense of safety and Vivian's entire future. But then she would add that the attack had also forced her to confront who she'd become. And that confrontation, as painful as it was, had been necessary. She'd been heading toward some kind of violent explosion for years. If it hadn't been Elena, it would have been someone else eventually. That didn't make what she did okay. It didn't excuse the harm she'd caused. But it meant something that she understood it, that she'd used her punishment to actually change, not just to resent and blame others. It was small comfort, but it was something. Back in the Victorian house, where Elena and Professor Harper were rebuilding their relationship, neither of them thought much about Vivian or Jordan anymore. Those chapters were closed. The focus now was on healing, on preparation, on the future that was rapidly approaching. Elena was in her final month of pregnancy, and every day brought new excitement and anxiety. Professor Harper had transformed Elena's childhood bedroom into a nursery. He'd painted the walls a soft yellow, installed shelves for books and toys, and assembled a crib that he'd researched for weeks to make sure it met all the latest safety standards. He'd approached the task with the same meticulous care he'd once brought to teaching music theory, studying baby care guides, and parenting books with academic thoroughness. Elena watched him prepare and felt her heart healing. This was what a father's love looked like: present, active, unconditional, not dependent on her making the right choices or living up to expectations. Just there, steady and reliable, ready to catch her when she fell. They talked about the past during these quiet weeks, about the fight that had driven them apart, about the 3 years of silence. Professor Harper apologized for letting his disapproval of Jordan drive a wedge between them. He explained that he'd seen something calculating in Jordan's eyes from the first meeting, a quality of emotional coldness that he recognized from his years of teaching ambitious young musicians. But he'd handled it wrong, pushed too hard, let his need to protect her override her right to make her own choices. Elena apologized too, for dismissing his concerns, for accusing him of being controlling and overprotective. She admitted now that she'd known somewhere deep down that Jordan wasn't quite right for her. But she'd been so determined to prove her father wrong, to show that she could make her own decisions, that she'd married Jordan partly out of stubbornness. Pride had blinded her, just as it had blinded Professor Harper. They forgave each other truly and completely, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with small daily acts of care and presence, with cups of tea shared at the kitchen table, with comfortable silences, with laughter over baby name ideas and debates about whether Lily would inherit the musical talent that ran through the family. The bond they'd broken 3 years ago was rebuilding stronger than before because it was tempered by loss and forgiveness. They had both learned that being right matters less than being kind, that protecting someone you love sometimes means letting them make their own mistakes, and that family is worth fighting for, even when pride wants to keep you apart. Elena Harper gave birth to a healthy baby girl on a crisp autumn morning. She named her Lily Marie Harper, choosing to give her daughter her own maiden name, rather than Jordan's surname. Professor Harper was in the delivery room, holding his daughter's hand through every contraction, crying when he heard his granddaughter's first cry. Lily was perfect. Tiny and pink and healthy, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's gray eyes. Elena held her for the first time and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. This was what mattered. Not Jordan's betrayal, not the pain of the past year, not the scars she still carried. This perfect little person who depended on her completely. Professor Harper retired from his position at the conservatory to help care for Lily. He claimed it was time anyway, that he'd been teaching for 40 years and was ready for a new chapter. But Elena knew the truth. Her father had missed so much of her life. He wasn't going to miss a moment of his granddaughters. They fell into a comfortable routine in the old Victorian house. Elena's room became a nursery painted soft yellow with clouds on the ceiling. The piano in the living room, silent for so long, began to sing again. Professor Harper played for Lily every evening soft lullabies and gentle classical pieces. The baby would fall asleep to Brahms and Schumann, her tiny hands curled against her chest. Elena started playing again, too tentatively at first. Her fingers were rusty. The muscle memory faded from years of neglect. But slowly, it came back. She played for Lily during the day, simple melodies that made her daughter coo and wave her little fists. She played for herself, in the quiet moments when Lily napped, rediscovering the joy she'd forgotten existed. One afternoon, about 3 months after Lily's birth, Elena received an unexpected visitor. Anna Martinez, the young pianist who had won the International Piano Excellence competition, came to the house carrying flowers and a gift bag. "I hope this isn't intrusive," Anna said, her voice shy. "I just wanted to see how you were doing, and to thank you." "Thank me?" Elena was confused. "For what?" "For being there that night. I know it sounds strange, but what happened, the whole awful situation, it meant something. Your father stood up for what music should be about, not just perfect technique, but real emotion. And you showed everyone what real courage looks like, being there despite everything you were going through. I think about that a lot." They talked for over an hour. Anna was sweet and genuine, nothing like the calculating ambition that had driven Vivian. She told Elena about her life since winning the opportunities that had opened up the concerts she'd played. But she also talked about her fears about imposter syndrome, about wondering if she deserved the prize. Elena assured her she did. "I heard your performance. Not in person, I was too upset to really listen that night. But I found a recording online later. You made me cry, Anna. You made me feel something real. That's what great piano playing should do." After Anna left, Elena sat at her father's piano and began to play. Her fingers found their way through a Chopin nocturne, one she'd learned as a teenager. She made mistakes. Her technique was rough, her timing imperfect. But she played with feeling, with genuine emotion, and that made all the difference. Professor Harper, holding sleeping Lily in his arms, listened from the doorway. When Elena finished, she turned to find him watching with tears in his eyes. What she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I've missed hearing you play," he said simply. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Elena had started teaching piano lessons from home, just a few students at first. Children from the neighborhood who wanted to learn, teenagers preparing for college auditions, even a few adults who had always dreamed of playing. She was a patient teacher, remembering her father's methods, combining technical instruction with encouragement to find their own musical voice. The money from the divorce settlement was substantial enough that Elena would never have to worry about finances again, but she found that teaching gave her something more valuable than money. It gave her purpose, connection, a way to share the gift her father had given her. She never heard from Jordan directly. He paid his child support on time every month, the money deposited automatically into an account Elena had set up for Lily's future education. That was the extent of their interaction. He never asked to see his daughter, never sent a card or gift. It was as if Lily didn't exist to him. Elena wondered sometimes if that hurt, if she should feel angry or sad that her daughter's father wanted nothing to do with her. But mostly she felt relieved. Lily deserved better than a father who only wanted her when it was convenient, who would always put himself first. She deserved to grow up seeing real love, real commitment, real integrity. She would have that with Elena and Professor Harper. One evening, as Elena was putting Lily to bed, she heard music drifting up from downstairs. Her father was at the piano playing a piece she recognized. Moonlight Sonata, Beethoven. It had been her mother's favorite. Professor Harper rarely played it anymore. The memories too painful, even after all these years. Elena carried Lily downstairs, the baby drowsy, but not quite asleep. They stood in the doorway listening. When the piece ended, Elena said quietly, she would have loved to meet Lily. Professor Harper turned on the piano bench, wiping his eyes. She would have been so proud of you, of how strong you've been, how you've rebuilt your life. I had help, Elena said, walking into the room. I couldn't have done it without you. That's what family is for. He held out his arms, and Elena carefully transferred Lily to her grandfather. He cradled the baby with the ease of long practice, smiling down at her. You know what I realized the other day? Lily is exactly the same age you were when your mother first put you at the piano. You could barely reach the keys, but you wanted to play so badly. Do you think she'll want to play? Elena asked, sitting beside them on the bench. I think she'll do whatever makes her happy, and we'll support her no matter what. That's the gift we can give her, the freedom to choose her own path. They sat together in the soft lamplight, 3 generations finding peace in that old Victorian house. Outside, the world moved on. Jordan Blake continued his slow fade into obscurity. Vivian Cross lived her quiet life of permanent exile. The scandal that had consumed them all became old news replaced by newer dramas. But in that house, in that moment, there was only love. The kind of love that heals wounds and mends broken things. The kind of love that says you are enough exactly as you are. The kind of love that makes beautiful music possible. Lily yawned, her tiny face scrunching up adorably. Elena took her back and headed upstairs for bedtime. As she climbed the stairs, she heard her father begin to play again. Not Moonlight Sonata this time, but something lighter. A lullaby, improvised and gentle, meant for his granddaughter's ears. Elena paused at the top of the stairs, listening to the music floating up from below. She thought about the path that had brought her here. The betrayal and pain, the violence and fear, the public humiliation. All of it had been terrible. All of it had nearly broken her. But it had also led her back to her father, back to music, back to herself. It had taught her that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. It had given her Lily, this perfect little person who made every hard moment worth it. And it had shown her what real love looked like, the kind that shows up when you need it most and stays. She had lost a husband, but she had gained back her father, rediscovered her passion, and found strength she didn't know she possessed. In the cosmic accounting of life, she had come out ahead. As she laid Lily in her crib and pulled the soft blanket up to her chin, Elena made a promise. She would raise her daughter to know her worth, to understand that love should never hurt, should never diminish, should never ask you to give up your dreams. She would teach her to play piano if she wanted, or support her in whatever else called to her heart. She would make sure Lily grew up knowing she was loved unconditionally, protected fiercely, and valued infinitely. The music from downstairs had stopped. Elena heard her father's footsteps on the stairs, his gentle knock on the nursery door. "She down," he whispered. Finally, Elena whispered back, "Come look at her." They stood together over the crib, watching Lily sleep. Her little chest rose and fell with perfect rhythm. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if she were dreaming of playing piano someday. "Thank you, Dad," Elena said quietly. "For everything. For taking me back. For fighting for me. For being here." "Always," Professor Harper said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I will always be here for both of you. That's a promise." They stood there a moment longer, then quietly left the nursery, leaving the door cracked open, and the nightlight glowing softly. Downstairs they made tea, and sat at the kitchen table talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Plans for tomorrow, memories of yesterday, hopes for all the tomorrows to come. Outside the city hummed with its endless activity, but in that Victorian house, there was peace. Hard-won, precious, real peace. The kind that comes after storms when you've survived and found shelter and remembered what home feels like. This was home. Not a penthouse with glass walls and designer furniture. Not a life built on appearances and shallow promises. This was home. Where love lived in every corner. Where music filled the spaces between words. Where a baby slept safely while her mother and grandfather kept watch. This was the happy ending Elena had never expected to find. Not the one she'd imagined on her wedding day, full of naive hope and unearned confidence. But a better one. More real, more earned, more true. As the night deepened and the tea grew cold, Elena thought about Jordan and Vivian, wherever they were. She didn't hate them anymore. Hatred required caring, and she had none left to spare for people who had shown her so clearly who they were. They had given her a painful gift, the clarity that comes from betrayal. They had forced her to find strength she didn't know she had. In a strange way, she was grateful. Not for the pain, but for what the pain had taught her. About herself. About what mattered. About the difference between the love you think you want and the love you actually need. She looked at her father. This man who had tried to warn her, who had been proven right, but took no satisfaction in it, who had simply opened his arms and welcomed her home. This was love, steady, reliable, unconditional, not exciting or passionate or dramatic, just there, always there, solid as the ground beneath her feet. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart, now and always." And in the nursery upstairs, Lily slept on dreaming baby dreams, safe and loved and perfect. The future stretched out before her, full of possibility and promise. Whatever path she chose, wherever life took her, she would have what every child deserves. A mother who would fight for her, a grandfather who would cherish her, and a foundation of love strong enough to weather any storm. The music had stopped. The drama had ended. The justice had been served. What remained was simply life in all its ordinary beauty. A family together finding their way forward. One day at a time. One note at a time. Playing the music that mattered most. If this story touched your heart, if Elena's journey resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. Stories about justice, redemption, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Stories that remind us that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. Next time, we'll share another story of courage in the face of adversity. Another reminder that you are stronger than you know, that family matters more than wealth, and that real love always finds a way. Thank you for listening to Elena's story. May you find the same courage she found, and may you always know your worth.